Two of the founding members of Thin Lizzy, bassist and singer Phil Lynott and drummer Brian Downey, attended school together in Dublin in the early 1960s. Later, they were together in the local band Black Eagles, from which Phil left in 1967, becoming the singer of Skid Row through the bassist Bruce Shields, who also brought a teenage guitarist from Belfast named Gary Moore into the band in early 1968. After a disappointing television appearance in June 1969, Shields fired the singer, although they remained friends, and Shields later taught Phil to play bass, since he had only been singing until then. Lynott then formed Orphanage with his old friend Downey on drums, after the breakup of Brian's previous band, Sugar Shack. At the same time, the guitarist from Belfast, Eric Bell, a former member of Van Morrison's Them between September and October 1966, had moved to Dublin and was looking for a way to form a rock band. A friend of Bell's, the keyboardist Eric Rickson, also a former member of Them, was also in Dublin at that time with similar plans to move toward rock music. In December 1969, the two of them met by chance in a city pub and found that they were looking for the same things. When they saw Orphanage play at the Countdown Club, they were so impressed with Downey that they wanted to meet the band and eventually agreed to form a new group with the drummer, on the condition that his friend Phil would play bass and sing, and that the new band would play some of his compositions. Rickson was included as the organist, making the initial lineup of the still unnamed band a quartet. The new lineup began to attract the attention of the Irish music press almost immediately, with journalists talking about the Bell Lynott supergroup. The band began rehearsals in January 1970, and the name Thin Lizzy was announced to the press on February 18th. The name originated from an idea by Bell and was based on a robotic character from the comic magazine The Dandy named Tin Lizzy. In the local Dublin pronunciation, thin is pronounced as tin, so the name was a play on that. In July 1970, the band released its first single, The Farmer / I Need You, through EMI. The track is a composition by Lynott, while the B-side is written by John Dardies, the owner of Trend Studios, where the two songs were recorded. Of the 500 copies that were printed, only 283 were sold, which are now highly sought after by collectors. This would be Rickson's only involvement in an official Thin Lizzy recording, since he left the band before the single's release. Peter Eustace, the band's roadie at the time, has said that Thin Lizzy was much more Eric's band in the beginning, and Phil just participated, adding that his earliest memory of them playing live was Eric trying out his Jeff Beck and Jimi Hendrix routines. By the end of the year, Thin Lizzy had signed with Decca Records and traveled to London in January 1971 to record their debut album. The recording lasted 6 days, with Eric Bell stating that all three of them were stoned throughout, and he himself doesn't remember anything from the sessions, apart from producer Scott English giving them bags of weed. The album, simply titled Thin Lizzy, was released on April 30th, 1971, and did not sell very well, despite the support of well-known DJs John Peel and Kid Jensen. As early as March 71, the band had permanently moved to London, and in August, the EP New Day was released, which also failed commercially. However, Decca continued to support them, so in January 1972, they entered the Delane Lee Studios in London and recorded their second album, which was released in March 1972 under the title Shades of a Blue Orphanage. Neither did this album manage to enter the charts in the United Kingdom. Musically, the two LPs were quite similar. They primarily offered an acoustic Celtic folk style, with some hints of the hard rock direction that would make the band famous in the future. The lyrics spoke about Lynott's personal memories, his life in Dublin, and the people he knew there. During 1972, the band toured Europe, but only their concerts in Ireland provided them with the necessary money to continue. Later that year, the Irish band joined the tour of the hugely successful at the time Slade. Decca released a record to coincide with this tour and chose the band's unique rock version of the traditional Irish folk song, Whiskey in the Jar. The band was very upset with this release, as they felt that people would label them as a folk rock band, something they were determined to shake off. The song was a huge success, and remained at the top of the Irish charts for 17 weeks while reaching number 6 in England. In 1973, they began working on their third album, which was eventually released in September of the same year, under the title Vagabonds of the Western World. Their sound began to evolve as the mystical Celtic influences started to blend more clearly with the themes of hard rock and songs like, for example, The Rocker. We also noticed the increasingly prominent presence of Phil as the face of Thin Lizzy, which is evident from the cover. Despite the strong radio presence of their songs and the relative success outside of Ireland of the single The Rocker, the album once again failed commercially, and the momentum gained from Whiskey in the Jar was lost. Toward the end of the year, Eric Bell began to feel constrained by the band's evolving style, which left little room for the free improvisation he liked, and he also felt the pressure of creating the next big hit after Whiskey in the Jar. Things came to a head at a concert on New Year's Eve 1973 at Queen's University in Belfast, when he walked off stage in the middle of the performance and had to be persuaded to finish the set. The next day, he left the band and was immediately replaced by former Skid Row guitarist Gary Moore, who helped them complete the tour. Moore remained with the band until April 1974, and he even managed to record 3 songs with them, one of which would be included in their 4th album to be released later that year. He left Lizzy mainly because he was concerned about his health, having begun various bad habits with them, while also struggling to compete with Lynott for control of the band. With Moore's departure, Lynott decided to expand the lineup with 2 guitarists and hired 2 new members to complete a German tour in May 1974. These were the former guitarist of Atomic Rooster and Hard Stuff, John Ducan, and the German Andy G. This lineup didn't work out as the bassist didn't get along with Ducan, and G had a contract with another record label. Things in the band were not going well. Success was not coming despite the relentless tours. So a disappointed Brian Downey left Thin Lizzy even before the German shows were completed. Phil begged him to reconsider, mentioning that the impending end of their contract with Decca would be an opportunity for a fresh start. The drummer was convinced to return, and the 2 of them auditioned many candidates, eventually settling on the 18-year-old Brian Robertson from Glasgow and the Californian Scott Gorham. The new lineup quickly bonded, left behind most of the old songs they used to play live, and secured a new record deal with Phonogram. They entered the studio in September 1974 and recorded their next album, which was released on November 8th under the title Nightlife. The song Still in Love with You originated from the sessions with Gary Moore, while the overall direction of the album was now purely and primarily hard rock. However, success still did not come as the album was considered quite mild, and the band's style still underdeveloped. Both Robertson and Gorham would later blame Ron Nevison's production for the album's failure, describing it as quite naff and unacceptably mild. Early in 1975, Thin Lizzy toured the United States for the first time, supporting Bob Seger and Bachman Turner Overdrive, BTO. When BTO toured Europe later that year to support their hit single, You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, Thin Lizzy were again with them. Probably all these high-profile tours helped them since their 5th album. Fighting, which was released on September 12, 1975, became their first LP to enter the charts of any country, reaching number 49 in Sweden and number 60 in the United Kingdom. On this album, we have the true beginning of the dual guitar sound that would become the band's trademark in the future. It can be heard both in the dual harmonies of Wild One and in the solos of the 2 guitarists in Suicide. The band acknowledged that it was Wishbone Ash who practically started this sound, but they were the ones who adapted it to heavy rock. In fact, the harmonizing sound was created by chance after a mistake by the sound engineer in the studio, one of the few times Luck smiled to Thin Lizzy. The Fighting tours were very successful, and recordings for Thin Lizzy's next album began in late 1975. Gorham and Robertson later expressed complaints about the process, with the Californian stating that producer John Alcock showed no interest in his guitar tone, while the Scot claimed that the songs were too tight and did not give him space to develop his lead guitar playing. The album, titled Jailbreak, would be released on March 26, 1976, and despite the complaints from the two guitarists, it would be the big success they had been waiting for the past 7 years. It reached number 10 in the United Kingdom and number 18 in the US, while the song The Boys Are Back in Town became the biggest hit of their career, reaching number 8 in the United Kingdom and number 12 in America. The sound of the twin guitars was now complete and was evident throughout the album, but particularly in tracks like Emerald, Warriors, and Cowboy Song. The album financially secured the band, allowing them to continue and giving them greater freedom for the next steps in their career. Thin Lizzy toured the USA as a support act for bands like Aerosmith, Rush, and REO Speedwagon. They returned there in June 1976, this time with Rainbow. But shortly after the tour began, Lynott fell ill with hepatitis, and the rest of the tour was canceled. The disappointment within the band was palpable, as they believed this tour would elevate them to the truly upper echelon, the A-list, so to speak. It was the first time that fortune would abandon the band, but, as we will see below, not the only one. As the bassist was confined to a hospital in Manchester to recover, he had an acoustic guitar with him and wrote the songs for the next album on it. When he left the hospital in August, he traveled with the rest of the band to Munich, to the classic Musicland studios, to record the songs he had written. But no one was satisfied with the studio, so they decided to return to London to complete the recordings. That's when the first serious problems in Lynott's relationship with Robertson appeared. The two of them had frequent disagreements, but nothing significant. However, when the bassist played the song Don't Believe a Word for the first time in front of everyone, in a slow 12-bar blues style, Robertson called it shit. Phil was so upset that he left the studio for a few days. While he was away, Robertson and Brian Downey reworked the song, made it faster, and fixed the riff, changes that particularly pleased the band's frontman when he returned to the studio. The thing is, the track was released in this form as a single reaching number 12 in the UK, but the songwriting credits went exclusively to Lynott, which infuriated Robertson. As for the album, it was released in October 1976 under the title Johnny the Fox. It was yet another success for the band, reaching number 11 on the British charts and number 56 in America. The band had now found their style and seemed confident in what they were doing, while surprises like the funk in the title track were more than welcome. The tours in Europe and the United Kingdom went very well, and while the band was ready to leave for the US in December 1976, Lady Luck played with them for a second time. The night before the band's scheduled flight, Brian Robertson injured his hand with a broken bottle after a fight at the Speakeasy Club in London. The Scottish guitarist insisted he was not drunk and had gone there just to have a meal, but an angry Phil Lynott replaced him with Gary Moore. And the band eventually managed to return to America in March 1977 as support to Queen. The tour was successful and the bassist asked Moore to stay, but he declined and returned to Coliseum 2. Robertson had not been officially fired, but when the band flew to Canada to record their next album, he was not with them. Gorham wrote all the guitar parts, but he felt that the band wouldn't work well as a trio, especially live. So he deliberately left some gaps in certain songs, convincing Phil to invite Robertson to the studio. And so it happened, and the Scot ended up recording lead on 3 tracks of the album as a guest, according to the bassist. The album was finally released on September 2nd, 1977, titled Bad Reputation. Thin Lizzy are depicted as a trio on the cover, but Robertson rejoins them on the back cover, as he had officially returned to the band in July. The album was very successful, reaching number 4 in Britain and number 39 in America. One of the band's highlights up to that point was when they played as headliners at the Reading Festival on August 21st, 1977. As often happened at that time with bands that were successful in heavy rock, the band decided to release a live album. Initially, they wanted to release a regular studio LP, but since producer Tony Visconti only had 2 weeks available, they decided to release a live one instead. This will be released on June 2nd, 1978, and will be titled Live and Dangerous. It comes from various live recordings of the past 3 years, which were selected by the band members, along with Visconti. The album was a huge success in Great Britain, where it reached #2 on the charts and is still considered one of the best live albums of all time. However, as with many similar releases of the time, there was always doubt about whether what we were hearing was truly live. Visconti has stated that 75% of the album was recorded in the studio, a view that is vehemently opposed by both the band's then manager Chris O'Donnell and Robertson and Gorham. In fact, the Scottish guitarist has stated that it would have been impossible to work on the album in the studio due to the lack of acoustic separation between the instruments in the live recordings. Robertson's disagreements with Lynott reached a point of no return after a concert in Spain on July 6, 1978, when the Irish bassist fired the Scottish guitarist for good this time. He will be replaced for the second time in our story by Gary Moore. The band embarked on another American tour in August 1978, followed by dates in Australia and New Zealand. Brian Downey did not accompany them, as he had contracted pneumonia and was replaced for the tour only by American drummer Mark Nausif. When they returned to Ireland, they immediately took Downey and left for Paris, where, in December 1978, they began recordings for the band's next album. During their days in the French capital, the increase in the presence of drugs around the band was evident due to their abuse by Lynott and Gorham. The album would be released in April 1979 under the title Black Rose, a Rock Legend. It was another great success, reaching #2 on the British charts, #81 in America. Over the years, it has come to be considered the best album in the band's history, both due to the variety of sounds you find in it and the collaboration of two of the greatest musicians in Irish heavy rock history, Phil Lynott and Gary Moore. Perhaps the most fitting closing of the album was the 7-minute Ráisín Dubh, a medley of traditional Irish songs with a rock overlay from dual guitars, arranged by Lynott and Moore. And while things seemed to be going really well for the band, which appeared stronger than ever, once again, fate would play a cruel trick on them. On July 4th, 1979, after their performance at Day on the Green in Oakland, Gary Moore suddenly left Thin Lizzy in the middle of yet another American tour. What he had seen in the studio and what he saw on the road in relation to the habits of his bandmates had really terrified him. Years later, he would say that he didn't regret leaving, but perhaps the way he did it was wrong. It really seemed like this band was truly cursed.
Round here, they don't take kindly to the killing of the buffalo.
After Moore's departure, Thin Lizzy continued for a few concerts as a trio, before Lynott brought in Midge Ure to temporarily replace him. Ure had co-written a song with the bassist, Get Out of Here, on Black Rose, and agreed to help them fulfill their commitments. He also contributed guitar parts to The Continuing Saga of the Aging Orphans, a compilation album of remixes and re-recorded versions of tracks from the Eric Bell era. Before a tour in Japan that was set to start in September, Phil decided to bring in another guitarist, Dave Flett, former Manfred Mann's Earth Band, so that Ure could play keyboards where necessary. The tour was successfully completed, but the band's lineup now included 2 temporary members, while the frontman spent a lot of time away from the band, writing and producing material for other bands, while simultaneously preparing his first solo album. Dave Flett hoped to become a permanent member of Thin Lizzy, but Phil ultimately chose Snowy White, who had played with Pink Floyd and Peter Green. In April 1980, the Irish bassist's first solo album was released under the title Solo in Soho, featuring all the then-current members of Thin Lizzy. That same month, work began on the band's next album. Ure left them to find massive global success as a member of the New Romantics scene, while the new keyboardist, 18-year-old Englishman Darren Wharton joined the band during the album's recordings, initially as a temporary member. The album, titled Chinatown, will eventually be released in September 1980 and will continue the band's very good streak in the United Kingdom, where it reached number 7, while in America it won't even make it into the top 100 of the Billboard Albums chart. The general reception of the album to this day is somewhat lukewarm, considering that the overall chaos surrounding the band, with the member changes and Phil's various projects, had affected its quality. But if you want my opinion, the album is another gem, very close to the giants that preceded it. After a successful tour in Japan and Australia, the band embarked on what would prove to be their final tour in the US in late 1980. Now that their popularity had declined, nothing crazy happened to them. In January 1981, Thin Lizzy traveled to the Bahamas to start work on their next album at Compass Point Studios. Lynott used time from the sessions to record tracks for his second solo album. Also, tracks intended for Lizzy would end up on his album and vice versa. So in the end, the musicians didn't know where what they were recording would end up, and the situation was particularly confusing. Of course, by leaving things intentionally vague about where each song was going to end up, the bassist wouldn't have to pay the Thin Lizzy musicians separately for their work on his second solo album. In May, the work continued in London, and in July, the band recorded 2 covers, Trouble Boys, written by Billy Bremner of Rockpile, and Memory Pain by Percy Mayfield. Phil wanted to release the first as a single, while everyone else hated it. He eventually convinced the band's record label to do it, even planning to name the upcoming album Trouble Boys. But when the single flopped at number 53 in the UK charts, the title and all the proposed artwork were scrapped. In September, the band was preparing to complete the record when Phil's disagreements with producer Kit Wolven over the confusion between the 2 albums, Lizzy's and Lynott's, led to the latter's departure and replacement by a then-young Morgan Studios producer named Chris Tsangarides. He tidied things up, convinced them to cut some songs, like the 2 covers, for example, and changed the names of others, and so the album was finally released in November 1981, under the title Renegade. The record didn't perform well commercially, only reaching number 38 on the British charts. It has gone down in history as one of the worst albums by Thin Lizzy, an opinion with which I vehemently disagree, as I consider it even better than Chinatown, and believe that the absolute chaos in which it was created gives it a variety and character that it otherwise wouldn't have. Although Wharton was now a permanent member of the band, his face was omitted from the photos on the back cover of the album, a thing that particularly upset him, as he would later say. The overall state of chaos and disintegration extended into early 1982, when both Downey and Gorham temporarily left the band to deal with personal issues. Downey was involved in a brawl at a nightclub in Denmark in February and was injured, missing 5 concerts, while Gorham collapsed from drug exhaustion in March. So 8 concerts were done without him, and another 6 were postponed. Snowy White left in August 1982, tired of Lynott's disorganization and drug problems. Plus, his blues-playing style in general did not fit with the Lizzy style. At the same time, the band's longtime manager Chris O'Donnell also left, later saying, "A once brilliant band was turning into crap before my eyes." The failure of Lynott's second solo album in September temporarily halted his solo career and made him fully devote himself to Thin Lizzy again. The replacement for Snowy White will be John Sykes, a former member of Tigers of Pantang. Sykes co-wrote the first single from the new album, Cold Sweat, although when the band entered the studio to record that album, again with Tsangarides as producer in late 1982, the rest of the material had already been written. The LP would eventually be released in March 1983 under the title Thunder and Lightning. It was much more successful than its predecessor, reaching number 4 in the UK. It's simply one of the best final albums ever released by a heavy rock band. Through the trials and failures of recent years, one of the strongest records in the band's history had emerged. Sykes' presence had musically rejuvenated them, and their style had become much heavier, very close to the then particularly popular heavy metal. Just think that Cold Sweat was later covered by Sodom and Megadeth. The tour to promote the album would prove to be their last. Lynott wasn't sure the band had reached the end. Sykes wanted to continue, but Gorham didn't. The last release by Thin Lizzy was a live album released in October 1983 titled Life. All the band's former guitarists appear on it, having been invited to play songs they had recorded with the band, except for Snowy White, who appears through tracks that had been done on the previous tour. The album reached number 29 in the UK. Thin Lizzy played their last concert in Britain at the Reading Festival on August 28, 1983, and their last concert overall in Nuremberg on September 4th at the Monsters of Rock Festival. After its end, the band members each followed their own path, and the band ceased to exist.
It doesn't matter if you're wrong or if you're right.
Before the end of 1983, Lynott formed a new band called Grand Slam, along with guitarist Lawrence Archer and, initially, Brian Downey on drums. The drummer left in late 1984, and the band never managed to secure a record deal, so it disbanded in early 1985. Phil Lynott's most successful moment after many years was his participation in various tracks of Gary Moore's album, Run for Cover, which was released in September 1985. One of these, Out in the Fields, reached number 5 on the British charts, the biggest success in the career of the Irish bassist, while another, Military Man, was initially intended for Grand Slam. Phil's immediate plans in late 1985 were a third solo album and a probable Thin Lizzy reunion for March 1986, possibly with Gorham and Sykes returning. In fact, he had booked studio time for January of the same year. The English guitarist Robin George has stated that Phil had asked him and Brian Downey to reform Thin Lizzy, which both had agreed to. In fact, according to the guitarist, they even made some recordings at Lynott's personal studio, located in the garden of his home in Kew, in December 1985. George would say that the recordings were great, but the cassette tape with the songs was lost and never appeared in any archival release. All these plans would remain unfulfilled, as Philip Paris Lynott died at Salisbury Hospital in Wiltshire on January 4, 1986, at the age of 36. He had been admitted suffering from internal abscesses, pneumonia, and septicemia, all caused by his drug habit. The cause of death was multi-organ failure. On May 17, 1986, Thin Lizzy reunited for the Self-Aid concert, featuring Gary Moore, Brian Downey, Scott Gorham, Darren Wharton, and Bob Daisley on bass. Moore and Bob Geldof took on most of the lead vocals, although various singers joined on stage for Whiskey in the Jar. In the years that followed, various reunions of former band members took place on stage. Various compilations were released, as well as the unreleased single Dedication in 1991. John Sykes decided to activate the Thin Lizzy name in March 1996, with the band's last official lineup, him on vocals and American Marco Mendoza on bass. This version of Lizzy remained active until July 2009, with Sykes and Gorham as the only permanent members and one official release, the live album One Night Only from 2000. In May 2010, Scott Gorham decided to reactivate the name, this time with Ricky Warwick, formerly of the Almighty, on vocals, Vivian Campbell, Dio Def Leppard, on guitar, plus Mendoza, Wharton, and Downey. This version continued to tour with various lineups until 2019, and many well-known names of heavy rock passed through its ranks, such as Guns N' Roses guitarist Richard Fortus, Aerosmith bassist Tom Hamilton, Judas Priest drummer Scott Travis, and Mastodon bassist Troy Sanders. They released various live albums, but fortunately for all of us, when it came time to release new material, they adopted the name Black Star Riders, which gradually became a distinct and autonomous band. I don't need to tell you my opinion on the existence of the name Thin Lizzy without Phil Lynott. Fortunately, they stuck with live performances only. Anyway, the names that passed through the new Lizzy show the great prestige their name acquired through the passing years. One could say that the last twist of fate against them was the fact that when they finally gained the fame they deserved, the man who had carried them on his back for 14 years, the one who built them from scratch until they became a respected name in heavy rock, was no longer with us. Thin Lizzy were perhaps the first modern hard rock band at a time when genre overlaps were considered very risky and everyone preferred to stick to their corner. A band that laid the foundation for the twin guitar hard rock sound and clearly influenced the heavy metal that would come, did not hesitate to add elements of funk, jazz, or even disco to some of their songs without ever losing their identity. They provided us with a discography of unparalleled quality, with a series of amazing albums that we rarely see in heavy rock, and rightly earned the status they have today. The only pity is that they didn't achieve this status when it mattered, when they were at the peak of their creativity, because they had to face adversity or simple bad luck so many times in their career. Even so, we thank them for the music.